Welcome back to Whiskey Politics. Dave Sussman here with the Ricochet podcast at FreedomFest. And before we get into this, I just want to say, Larry Elder, out of all the interviews I've been doing over the past few days, this is the one my mother's going to be most excited about.
Hi, Mom.
The Sage of South Central. If you're not familiar with Larry, and I don't know who wouldn't be, with Salem Media, he is over 300 stations syndicated around the country. And first of all, I want to get into this with you being here at FreedomFest. You're a fiscal conservative, but you've always referred to yourself as more socially liberal leaning on those types of issues. Explain how that works for you as far as FreedomFest, free markets, free minds being here this week.
Well, as you pointed out, I'm a fiscal conservative. I believe that the federal government should be limited by Article 1, Section 8, a handful of things that the federal government can do and should do. Outside of that, the federal government shouldn't have its hands in anything else. They never should have set up a Social Security. I would like to think I would have been a rabid opponent of Medicare and Medicaid in '65 when it was passed. I was 13 years old. I didn't have much of a voice then.
Right.
And those are the three major entitlements that are driving the debt and the deficit. So I believe that we made a huge mistake at several points throughout our history. After the ink was dry, when the Constitution was written, we haven't followed it. I remember reading that James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was ticked off because shortly after the document was ratified, Congress granted some money for charity. And he said, I don't find anything in here that I wrote that it gives you the authority to do that. But they've been doing it ever since then. On the social side, again, I believe that things like marriage, things like doctor-assisted suicide, things like drugs, all these kinds of things should be fought, if they're going to be fought, at the state level. And the federal government should be out of it. So a state wants to recognize same-sex marriage, that's that state's right. If one state doesn't, that state's right. That's the whole concept of federalism.
Right, 10th Amendment.
Yeah, and that's what and the 9th Amendment, 10th Amendment. So
yeah,
that's how I feel.
Yeah, okay. Which is really interesting because we're here obviously at a libertarian-leaning convention, and libertarianism, per se, if you will, would be about smaller government out of my pocketbook and my bedroom.
That's right.
Right? Mm-hmm. So we're seeing a lot of that cultural issue, social issue. We've had this on Ricochet. I mean, during the same-sex marriage debate, it got ugly. Mm-hmm. It got really ugly. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on things. Now, getting now more into current issues of what's happening right now. I've seen you speak several times. We spoke briefly here at last Freedom Fest. Since last Freedom Fest, we now have a new president. And first of all, thoughts on Donald Trump the first 6 months?
They've been fascinating to watch the first 6 months. Whatever you say about Donald Trump, however many mistakes he's made, however many missteps he's made, he's not Hillary. And we're not talking about single payer. We're not talking about porous borders. We have a Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court as opposed to another Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So for all the slights and slings he's taken, I think we have to recognize and appreciate the fact that he's not Hillary. That said, I feel very strongly that the Republicans should not have promised to repeal and replace Obamacare unless they intended to do it. I think that there's going to be hell to pay in 2018 if something doesn't happen, even if that something is bad. And by bad, I mean you have two ways to go. You can either go towards freedom, towards liberty, or you can go towards single payer. And we're going towards single payer. And as soon as the Obamacare got passed, I said on the air, it's done. There's no way this is going to be undone. Even if there's a Republican president, even if there's a Republican Congress, you have to have 2/3 to overturn a. You have to have 60 votes in order to sustain a filibuster. We're not going to get close to that. And even if they go nuclear and do it reconciliation, when the next Democrat comes in, they put it right back in.
Right.
By the way, that's the argument. Whether you're a Bernie Sanders supporter or a Ron Paul supporter, the argument for limited government ought to be just that. What happens when the other guys get in? The guys you don't like get in. Right now, Congress has done this now so they can change things on a majority vote. So, next guy comes in, we're going to undo what Donald Trump did. Next people come in, they'll undo what the people did that undid what Donald Trump did. So, if you really want to have a stable life. Don't you think it's preferable that when government changes hands, your life is not messed with in any fundamental way? But it will be in a fundamental way if health care is determined by the federal government and it goes back and forth depending upon who's in office. That alone ought to frighten people on either side.
When you talk about health care, are you a purist that says, and I agree with this, are you a purist that would say that it is absolutely not incumbent for the federal government to be involved in health care at all? Or are you looking for a safety net, grade level, or what are they talking about?
Let me think about that. At all.
At all?
At all.
Okay.
Absolutely at all.
It's a state issue? Is it local?
Well, certainly the federal government shouldn't be involved in it at all.
Okay.
I would prefer that government not be involved in it at any level, that the private sector do it, and there will be people who have pre-existing illnesses, I get that, or people who are too irresponsible to take care of themselves, I get that. That's the job of charity. That's the job of individuals to help other individuals. We're the most generous nation on the face of the earth. Why it is that people think if government didn't mandate this, that, and the other, we wouldn't help other people?
Right.
If there's a natural disaster in some third world country, who steps up? We do. Who stepped up on 9/11? We did. We're the most generous nation. We forgive more debt. We give more money. We're the biggest contributor to the World Health Organization, biggest contributor to the World Bank, to the International Monetary Fund,
Right.
and that's just private charity, public charity rather. We also have a lot of private charity. You add it all up, we are far more generous than the French and the Germans and the Japanese by far. And if the government weren't involved in the so-called social safety net, we'd step up and we would do it.
Right, right. So you're also taking a look back at the last 6 months and you're saying, okay, and I heard you say this at the Reagan Library with Hugh Hewitt and Ben Shapiro a couple months ago, and you said, he isn't Hillary.
Right.
This is the great thing, and it is what you just repeated right here as well. But let's talk a little bit more about some of the issues that the media seem to be extremely just lasered in and focused on, especially the leftist media, and we're talking about collusion with Russia and this that. First I want your focus on that, but then also your comparative to say, hey, what about Ted Kennedy? What about
and
Chinagate, right?
In particular.
Yeah, so what of that?
Well, first of all, I think I've never seen a scandal go this far with this thin a basis. I've never seen anything like it.
Right.
I'm not even sure what the underlying crime is, and I know that you don't have to commit a crime to be impeached. But generally speaking, when there's been an impeachment inquiry, it's been because the president's been perceived as having committed a crime. In the case of Bill Clinton, he perjured himself. In the case of Richard Nixon, he's suborned perjury. In the case of Andrew Johnson, he violated a law that was passed, arguably a law that was not legal, but it was a law that said you can't fire any one of Abraham Lincoln's cabinet members, and he did. And he got him. There was an impeachment inquiry. He was impeached. He wasn't thrown out of office, but he was impeached for that. So there was arguably there's an underlying violation. I don't know what the collusion violation is.
Right.
If I'm running for office, I get a phone call from somebody that seems relatively credible, got dirt on my opponent, I take the meeting.
Right.
And I certainly think Hillary and Bill take the meeting. Are you kidding me? Now, what about Chinagate? Chinagate involved Asian businessmen who were giving money to the DNC illegally. Oops, the DNC said they didn't know it came from any of these Chinese interests. There was a investigation. An FBI investigation.
This is during the Clinton administration. Yes.
FBI investigation, and the head of the FBI, Louis Freeh, told the AG, Janet Reno, if there is any reason for a special counsel, it is now.
Right.
There was a successor, a guy named Charles Bellow, who also conducted an investigation. He reached the same conclusion. If there's any reason for a special counsel, it is now. She didn't do it. Now we have a special counsel for reasons that are far thinner than those, in my opinion. So the outrage is not, the answer is not to say, well, these guys did it too. However, if in fact you really are concerned, and you really believe this rises to the level of an impeachable offense, why didn't you feel that way about Hillary? Where were you? Where were you when the Ukrainians met with members of the Hillary team at the Ukrainian embassy?
Uranium One.
Right. And also this whole thing about Donald Trump being too cozy with Putin. Let's remember, George W. Bush negotiated a missile defense treaty with Poland and the Czech Republic. One of the first things Obama did was to renege on that deal because the Russians didn't like it. He wanted the Russians' support in dealing with Iran. The Poles and the Czechs were pissed off. They were furious. And of course, Obama said to Medvedev and the hot might, once I get reelected, I have more flexibility. He had Hillary push the reset button because he thought George W. Bush was a warmonger. So if anybody has any blood on his hands in terms of coziness with Putin, it's Obama. But he's getting a pass. This is the media double standard that pisses me off and pisses conservatives off. And that's why people circle the wagons around Donald Trump, no matter what the new revelation is, and say we don't care because you guys didn't care about Chinagate. You didn't care about what Ted Kennedy did. I know we didn't know what he did, but after it was revealed, you didn't write about it.
Right.
You would have thought people would have written about it. They went, shh, like it never happened. So this is the kind of, our guys are okay, your guys are evil, that just strikes me as fundamentally rotten, and we're going to fight back. And this president fights back.
You refer to the comparisons of all the things that happened with the Clinton administration and the Obama administration and so forth, and it is, a lot of people will say, well, that's just whataboutism. Okay, come on, Larry. There is obviously so much smoke here,
and I call it double standardism and selective outrageism. That's what I call it.
Right.
Now, if it really is an offense, why wasn't this one an offense? Maybe neither one was. I don't know. You tell me.
How much of a role does the media play in perception on that?
Massive. Nate Silver, who's nobody's conservative, said only 7% of reporters self-describe as Republican. 7%. 93% of them describe themselves as something other than Republican.
Is the poll, 538?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nate Silver, 538. I don't know if it's a 538 poll, but he said it. So
okay.
He was quoting some polls. So.
Right.
But I've also seen numbers like that elsewhere. I don't think it's any surprise. Of the financial contributions that reporters gave in 2016, 2016, 90% of it went to Hillary. Look, the New York Times editorialized in favor of Hillary. All the major newspapers editorialized in favor of Hillary. The Washington Post has, the LA Times did. The Chicago Tribune even did. And that's a Republican newspaper. They editorialized, by the way, twice in favor of Obama. The first time they ever editorialized in favor of a Republican president. And this guy was
hometown boy.
Agreed, but he's the most left-wing president we've ever had.
Right.
And so if this is a Republican newspaper, even if he's your hometown boy, he's so left-wing. How can you do that? But they did it anyway.
Right. Wanted to ask you if you could share a story that you shared with the Reagan Library audience a couple of months ago regarding your father. And it touched me. So can I just let you go with it?
I appreciate it, Dave, because I wrote a book about it called,
yes, you did.
Called Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours. And it's about the fact that my dad and I had a fight when I was 15 years old. Looking back at it, relatively trivial. But I was prideful, so was my dad, and we didn't speak to each other for 10 years. I couldn't stand my dad growing up. I have 2 brothers. We felt the same way. So I felt that my attitude towards my father was validated by the way my brothers felt, too. None of us liked him. When we walk in the house, we just kind of got away with from the guy. So he starts a small cafe. Unfortunately, we all have to work for him.
Right. And
my dad would get mad and yell at me in front of people, and it was embarrassing. So I told myself, next time he yells at me, I'm leaving, walking out. I wish I could say to you, I told myself the next time my dad yells at me, I was going to come up to him and say, we're going to have a mano-a-mano conversation about this. But I was afraid of my father. So he yelled at me, I walked out. My dad was furious. He came home. He asked me why I walked out. I said, well, I got tired of the way you spoke to me. He paid me $10 a day plus tips. He had the $10, he balled it up, he threw it at me as I was laying on my bed. He walked out of my bedroom. My dad and I did not speak to each other for 10 years. And it was easy to avoid because I graduated from high school, went to college on the East Coast, went to law school in the Midwest. So whenever I'd come home to visit my parents, I would just avoid the SOB.
Right.
So now I'm 25 years old, living in Ohio, even though I'm from LA, and I'm having difficulty sleeping. And I began thinking about my father. And I wasn't quite sure why. I knew we would never be friends, but I figured it was because there was some sort of unresolved issue with him. So I called my secretary, said cancel all my appointments. I hopped on a plane, I flew to LA, didn't tell my parents I was coming, because I didn't want my dad to prepare for this. So I walked into the cafe at 1:30, we closed at 2:30. He was surprised to see me. I said, I want to talk to you. He said, so I put your bags in the back? I said, no, Dad, I'm only going to be here for 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'm going to leave. I figured I was going to tell him off. He's going to tell me that I was an ungrateful son. It would take about 5 or 10 minutes, out the door. My dad sat down, and I told myself before he sat down, don't list everything he's ever said to you, everything he's ever done to you, just a handful, give him an idea of how you feel, and let's call it a day. So my dad sat down, and I told him everything he ever did to me, everything he ever said to me, and you see how I can go. So I spoke nonstop for almost 25 minutes. Everything he ever said, everything he ever did, every slight. And finally I ran out of ammo, and my dad looked up, and he said, is that it? I said, yeah. He said, you didn't speak to me for 10 years for that? And I said, well, yeah. And my dad said, let me tell you about my father. my dad never spoke about his father. I mean, I knew that my dad was an only child, and I knew that whoever my father was not in his life, but he never spoke about it. And my dad said, "Your name Elder? It's not my last name. It is the name of the man who was in my life the longest. He was an alcoholic who physically abused my mother and abused me when I was trying to stop him. My mother was illiterate," my dad said, and she was irresponsible, and we would duck out in the middle of the night, skip out on the rent and move here and here and here. And my dad had a series of boyfriends. One of them was a man. When I came home when I was 13 years old, he and I started quarreling. She sided with the boyfriend and threw me out of the house, never to return. A 13-year-old black boy, Jim Crow South, Athens, Georgia, at the beginning of the Great Depression. Now, I don't know anybody who's had a hand dealt like that in this country. And my dad literally walked down the road and tried to get any work he could. Ultimately, he became a Pullman porter on the trains and traveled all over the country and came out to California, where I was born. And he felt it was sunnier and people were less racist. And maybe someday I'll relocate out here. World War II breaks out. My dad joins the Marines. My dad was a Montford Point Marine. These were the first black Marines. There were 20,000 of them. And Congress about 5 years ago or so gave them a Congressional Gold Medal. My dad got his posthumously. And my dad was a master sergeant, a staff sergeant, and became a cook in charge of cooking facilities. So as a cook, he goes back to Chattanooga where he met and married my mom, and he wanted to get him a job as a cook. He went to restaurant, and they said, "We don't hire niggers." My dad went to an unemployment office in Chattanooga, and the lady said, "You went to the wrong door." He goes to the hall, seats colored only, goes to that door, to the very same lady. My dad said, "This is BS. I'm going to LA. I'll send for you, Mom." He comes to California, restaurant to restaurant. "I'm sorry, you have no references." 1945. My dad said, "I'll work for free, just give me a reference." Wouldn't do that. That was California's way of saying the same thing, they just were more polite about it. This time, just one unemployment office. My dad took the first job, a job cleaning toilets at Nabisco brand breads, took a second job cleaning toilets at Barbara Ann Bread, cooked for a family on the weekends, went to night school about 2 or 3 nights a week to get his GED, and then to take chef training and additional education. My dad never slept, which is why he was so damn moody all the time. I didn't realize it. You get 3, 4, 5 hours of sleep consistently, week after week, month after month, walk into a house with 3 rambunctious boys throwing toys and water. See what that does to your mood. Right. So as my dad spoke, he got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I said, after an 8-hour conversation, 2 stools, close as you and I are sitting, the only time we broke up was to get up and go to the restroom. And I apologized to him. And he said, "Son," first time you ever called me son, "you have no reason to apologize. You just didn't know. But here's what I want you to do. And follow this. Hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You can't control the outcome, but damn it, you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you bitch and moan and whine about what somebody did to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it and say, what could I have done to have changed the outcome? And no matter how good you are, how right you try and be, sooner or later, bad crap is going to happen. How you respond to that bad crap will tell your mom and me whether or not we raised a man."
It's incredible. It's incredible, and it's touching, and you can also see, you heard that. How old were you when that occurred?
I was 25. And one more little addendum. My dad's a Republican. My mom was a Democrat.
Yeah.
And at the dinner table, when we had dinner together, I would watch a political debate back and forth. So I had the rare ringside seat of seeing a Republican, however crude my dad made the arguments, a Republican defend the position. Most black people never knew a Republican, have no idea, never saw one. And I know my dad was the only one in the neighborhood because during the primary season when they had booths for Republicans and Democrats, they would have 10 booths for Democrats and 1 for Republican, and the only one I ever saw go in there was my dad. And he didn't give a damn that the whole neighborhood knew he was a Republican. He was proud of it. And my dad always said, Democrats want to give you something for nothing. And when you try and get something for nothing, you almost always end up getting nothing for something. Don't fall for that, my dad would tell us.
It's amazing. And it touches me personally. You and I both had fathers that fought. My father dealt with anti-Semitism as a child in World War II, British London, the bombs dropping on them. His father, my grandfather, was in Nazi-occupied France for 4 years and a prisoner of war. It touches them. And my political perspective, being a conservative, is about self-reliance.
That's what it is.
It's self-reliance. It's getting up off the couch and opening that door for the opportunity, not expecting it. And I assume that's where you got yours from.
Maximum personal freedom requires maximum personal responsibility. freedom requires responsible use of that freedom.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I got to,
I
please.
say, you seem way too young to have a father who was a World War II vet.
No. He was the child of a World War II vet.
Okay.
Yeah, in London, and I was born and raised in London. My father's passed. He'd be 80 this year if he was still alive. But no, he was 6 or 7 years old. When the Blitz, the German Blitz.
I thought you said your father.
Yeah, my grandfather.
How old are you?
Yeah.
I said, you look amazing.
So yeah, I'm not bad for 70.
Whatever you're smoking, I want it.
Let's shift gears here. I can't believe we're going to talk about this again, especially with you. You turn on the news right now, and it's O.J. frigging Simpson again. 1994, 1995, 1996. You were such a forceful voice about what was happening, and the enraged perspective that you had. You were so angry with the trial. Talk about that, and then where we are right now. What's going to happen with this?
We could talk about this for hours, but I was more angry with the reaction to the trial from the black community.
Right.
I mean, the lack of critical thinking, which is exactly what Marcia Clark said. There is a National Review article, which I would urge your viewers to check out, called O.J. and My Kids, by a guy named Mark Gerson. Google it. And it's an article written during the O.J. Simpson case by a high school teacher from New Jersey whose kids were almost all black. And out of the 110, 1 or 2 possibly thought O.J. might have done it. All the rest were convinced that O.J. was not only not guilty in the sense that the state was not making its case, but that he didn't do it.
Right.
And one theorized that Cato Kalin did it. One thought A.C. Callins did it. One thought, I'm not making this up, the dog did it. These are high school students, and they're not joking.
The dog.
Nobody had any sympathy for Nicole, especially the black girls. They thought she was a vicious, evil woman for having stolen O.J. from his first black wife. I mean, it was madness. And this kind of unwillingness to connect the dots, all because you're angry at the white man, because you got pulled over one time and had a bad experience, so therefore you want revenge? Because that's what it was.
Right.
Privately? You put somebody in a room privately, like I did Leo Terrell one time? Leo Terrell was probably the biggest loudmouth defending O.J. Simpson around the world. And
I remember that, by the way. That was profound.
When the trial was over,
yeah.
He kept saying O.J. was innocent. Not just that they were going to find him like innocent. Leo and I went to dinner. He invited. He paid. I said, Leo, look at me and tell me O.J. Simpson did not kill 2 people. He went like this. I said, Leo, look at me. He wouldn't do it. I took his face. I said, look at me, Leo. He wouldn't do it. I mean...
So what was that, a pantomime? What was it? He had to...
I can't get in the man's head. You should interview him and find out why. But
okay.
Look, O.J. Simpson murdered 2 people. The evidence was overwhelming. The son of a bitch did everything but leave his business card at the crime scene, for crying out loud.
Right.
And how you can dismiss this mountain of evidence and deliberate for 2 hours, which is what the jury did, it is a monumental miscarriage of justice, an intersection of race and politics, and by and large, most of the people in that jury were just mad at the white man. And I have proof of it because one of the jurors in the documentary that just came out a few days ago, I forget her name, a black woman, and she said, it was revenge for Rodney King. She was a juror. And the documentarian, you heard his voice, the only time you ever heard his voice, you could tell he was shocked. And he said, did the other jurors feel that way as well? And she said, 90% of us did. They all had they deliberated among each other. So here she is acknowledging that it was payback, that was the word she said, payback for Rodney King. Yeah.
We're 20 years plus later. You've been, you voiced your opinions about President Obama, and specifically about race relations, and that you believe, and I'm paraphrasing you, correct me if I'm wrong, that they have become whiter. It's become more divisive. It's
a little more complicated than that. Because to me, the number one way of finding out whether or not different races, different ethnicities get along together is intermarriage. It's never been higher. 1 in 10 marriages in this country is a mixed marriage. And in California, it's almost 1 in 5. Intermarriage is booming. In the 50s, it was rare. It's no longer rare. You walk around California, you see interracial couples all over the place. So by the measure that most anthropologists look at to determine whether or not people are getting along, we're succeeding spectacularly.
Right.
What's changed are the politics. What we say to each other, how we speak to each other, how we address each other, the extent to which we feel comfortable around each other. Obama has made us more uncomfortable around each other because Obama has injected race in almost everything. We found out that the Ferguson thing was a lie. Obama still injects it during a speech before the United Nations. Obama said if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon. He embraced the Black Lives Matter movement. That is not what America thought they were going to get when they hired his ass. They thought they were going to get somebody who's going to bring us together, because even if you're a Republican, the idea of a black president suggests that maybe, just maybe, we've gotten to the point where an individual who is qualified in the minds of other people can be elected irrespective of his race, color, creed, and so forth. We thought we had reached a milestone. Instead, Obama almost acted like Al Sharpton most of the time. And that's what I mean by things got worse.
Right.
People thought that we were going to be able to get along better, have more of a sense of community, and we don't because of that. That said, in our own private choices, our own private world, we're able to make choices and be with whoever we want to a greater degree than we've ever been before. But there is discomfort because of that.
I'm not asking you to speak for the entire African American community, but why, from your perspective, when the statistics of economic, the numbers of the black community are going down, whether it's unemployment or wages or whatever it may be, that they still continue to support the leftist party? And what is it? I had Dinesh D'Souza here. Mm-hmm. Okay, we sat down and we talked about some of the same thing. He talked about the history, right? And the Dixiecrats and everything else that goes back to that. Do you see a change happening? Also, the numbers with Donald Trump increased in the black community as far as the people that voted for him. Obviously, it's still like ridiculously low,
like 8 or 9%, but still better than what Mitt
Romney
did. Yeah, and also Trump did better with Asians and did better with Hispanics, did better with young people than Romney did. Look, most black people have been trained to think Republican Party is evil. They're the villains.
Right.
Democratic Party wears the white hat. Republican Party wears the black hat. And Republicans haven't done a good job of articulating why blacks should vote for them. They haven't done a good job about explaining the racist history of the Democratic Party and the wonderful history of the Republican Party. Somebody once said, the left has convinced people in this country that Abraham Lincoln was a Democrat and that George Wallace was a Republican, when in fact they were reversed. Even with my own mom. My mom voted twice for George W. Bush, and she still is a registered Democrat. And I said to her, she died 5 years ago, but I said to my mom, 10 years ago, I said to my mom, why don't you change your registration? You're not voting for these people. And she said, well, gave me no answer. My mother is a very talkative person, articulate person. She had no answer. It was emotion.
Right.
And I said, Mom, do you have any idea about the history of the Republican Party? She didn't really know that much. And most people, let alone black people, have no idea that as a percentage of the party, more Republicans voted for the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 than did Democrats. Most people have no idea. And Abraham Lincoln, of course, was the first Republican president to win the presidency, and the Republican Party was started to contain and then ultimately to eliminate slavery. My goodness, they've got a wonderful history to tell, a wonderful story to tell, and they're not telling it, and the textbooks don't teach it.
Wow. Well, hopefully, more voices like yours are out there that will illuminate and educate people. I appreciate you taking the time, Larry. Any projects, anything coming up for yourself?
I've got another book. I've got a tentative title. I'm not going to give you the title, but it's about arguing against the left using left-wing people.
Interesting.
For example, Jimmy Carter once said that the Democratic Party made a moral and tactical mistake in becoming the party of Roe v. Wade and the party of abortion. And he admitted he was never comfortable because he felt Jesus would not approve of abortion. Now, whether you agree with that or not, the point is you have Jimmy Carter acknowledging that a major tenet of the Democratic Party is, in his view, immoral. He said it a couple times, kind of said it on the down low, but he said it. And I've got a collection of left-wing people that have inadvertently blurted out the truths, and I'm putting it all together in a book.
The little Sun Tzu right there.
Yeah.
Very nice.
The working title is The Case Against the Left by the Left.
Very
If
nice.
you steal it, I'll get mad.
Okay, sounds good. And we can obviously find you on Salem Radio Network across the country,
Right,
and many other books as well.
LarryElder.com.
Great.
And my Twitter is @LarryElder.
Very good. And follow his Twitter feed. It's fascinating, as well as his Facebook page as well. So greatly appreciate you taking the time, Larry. Enjoy. And folks, don't forget to follow us at ricochet.com, whiskeypolitics.net, iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And thanks to Hyperion Night for giving us the soundtrack as well.
And finished on a high note, too.
Very good. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Larry.
Appreciate it.
All right. Bye.